This is question 9, Higher Maths Paper 1, 2012. We have a curve shown here, and we're told it's y equals cosine of where the angle's at x plus a, and there's a plus b at the end. And it's shown from 0 up to 2 pi, so we're using radians. And it asks, what is the equation of the curve? In other words, what would a and b be? Certainly looks like a cosine curve, but it's shifted a wee bit to the right and it's shifted down. I think we should have a wee look at the cosine graph and do some playing around with the graph first before we try and answer this question. So here we have a cosine curve, the y-axis, x-axis here. So this is y equals cos x, and we are in radians. Maybe slightly unusual just to have numbers here. We usually have this point being pi upon 2 and this value is just a wee bit more than 3. Remember, pi is 3.14. That's pi radians. This is 3 lots of pi upon 2, and this, where it reaches its maximum again, is 2 lots of pi, by 6.28 roughly. So that's the normal scale radians. It's nice to see the numbers just sitting on there. I think sometimes you forget that pi is actually just a number. And up here, of course, cosine comes to a maximum of 1 and it comes down to a minimum of -1. So that graph shows you the various values of cos x as x changes. Now, one of the changes to that graph in this question is that we have a plus a, cosine of x plus a. And what I'm going to show you is I'm now going to change the value of a slightly. Let's add a bit. Now you can immediately see what's happening. I'm up about 1 now. I'm adding 1 radian, and the graph has moved to the left. So adding 1 here, 1 radian, has moved the graph 1 radian to the left. And I could continue with that process. I'm now reaching about 2 radians. I'm on to about 3, nearly pi radians. Well, just past pi. There's pi radians. And away back to 0. So the effect of adding values to this angle x is that the graph gets shifted to the left. Now the other effect is adding a number at the end. So we take the normal values of x and add, in the question it's b that's added at the end. So we're adding b at the end. And let me show you what happens when we start adding values. There's me adding 1, adding 2. And you can see when I'm adding 2 that the values that we used to have now increased by 2. So where we used to have cosine of 0 being 1, when we add 2 we get 3. So the whole graph is shifted up 2 units. So adding a constant b at the end shifts the graph up. Let me just move this back down to 0. Now, if a was negative, in effect with x minus a quantity, I'm sure you can think what's going to happen. Now I'm taking away values from x, making a negative, and the graph is moving to the right. There I've taken away 1 radian, and the graph moved 1 radian to the right. So subtracting 1 from the angle adds 1 to the graph. So subtracting, it moves to the right. Adding to the angle, it moves to the left. Let me just put that back at 0. And similarly, if we made b negative, in other words, subtract numbers from the values of cos x, then the graph, I think, will do the opposite of what it used to do when we added numbers. There it is, we're subtracting. So there's a subtracting 1, all the values of the cosine have now gone down by 1. So the whole graph is shifted back down 1 unit. I think we're now in a position to tackle the question. Okay, so let's see if we can figure out what's gone on in this example. So remember, adding a number a, if a is positive, then the graph moved to the left, and if b was positive, the graph moves up. Well, in this case, starting off with the cosine graph, let me just remind you what the cosine graph looked like again. The cosine graph, remember, started up here, went down, back up to 0, and back up to 1 again. So that's the starting position. This graph here has moved pi upon 6 to the right. In other words, this number here, we've subtracted pi upon 6. So x minus pi upon 6, the graph moves to the right. If you were adding pi upon 6, it would have moved to the left. So that's the first effect. We've now moved the graph down from this height, which was 1, down to a height of 0. So the graph has moved down 1 unit. In other words, this has become minus 1. We're subtracting 1. Remember, if it was plus 1, the whole cosine graph would have moved up. So the cosine graph moved pi upon 6 to the right, 1 down. So we've subtracted pi upon 6. Let's just write that out. Subtracted pi upon 6 from the angle. That's the shift to the right. And subtracted 1. That moves the whole graph down 1. So when it says, what is the equation of this curve? There it is. And let's just check the choices that we've got. I think that's choice A.